Hello, everybody. I literally just got back home from the Hulkamania show. My hair's a mess. I'm wet because I got wet coming home, and the show itself, wrestling-wise, was horrific. Many of the matches were just downright terrible. Many of the wrestlers that we know from WWE have become quite rotund. But having said that, it was really, really fun. It would have been about 10,000 people there. I'm guessing about 10 actually. It actually felt like a major show as opposed to a WWE show, which just feels like a house show. Even though there was less people at it, it did feel quite major. There wasn't too much that was tarped off, but they did have a big Titantron deal. Like, it was massive. Biggest I'd ever seen anyway live. But I haven't seen too many, but it was quite large. And I do believe it's going to be on DVD, so if you do want to see it, it may be available in the future. I'm not sure. They did say they were taping us chanting Hogan for the DVD, and I went along with it like a mark. The first match, Nick Dinsmore, formerly Eugene, and Pimp Father, formerly known as the Godfather, versus Rock of Love. Rock of Love, I didn't know who they were. One of them took his shirt off, and everyone was chanting, "Put your shirt back on." The match is like Nick Dinsmore cut a promo, still doing the Eugene gimmick. The fans booed him because they thought it was a bit childish, because there were a lot of older fans. The audience was a lot older. Whereas the Godfather, he was a bit over, a bit more over at least, and did get a good reaction. And Eugene eventually did get some support from the fans, so that was cool. And he was kind of being a bit cheeky with it. And yeah, I can't really give star ratings out because I was just there to enjoy it. I will be uploading some actual footage from the main event, Hogan versus Flair, onto like Blip TV or something tomorrow. So I'll put a link there inside, or do a video update saying go check it out. So yeah, next match was probably the best match in terms of work rate, and that was Spartan 3000 Matt Cross versus Shannon Moore, which was quite good. It wasn't very long. It was only about none of the matches were really very long though. It was only a few minutes long, but Matt Cross, did all of his flips, did a shooting star press, amazing. Everything was just so smooth and excellent. He got no reaction coming out because a lot of, like, most fans didn't know who he was. But after he did that shooting star press, it got one of the biggest pops of the night because it was just excellently done. And a lot of the fans there were smarter fans that they could appreciate. Not smarter as in they knew who Matt Cross was, though I suspect there were a few people who did. But his gimmick kind of killed his credibility, I suppose. Sorry if I'm looking around. There are cats walking around in this room for some reason. The next match was Vampire Warrior or Gangrel versus Black Pearl of the Count of California versus the Nasty Boys with Jimmy Hart. The Nasty Boy, like this match, they cut a promo before the match, and on the screen that is, pre-tape promo guy saying, "Oh, it's going to be an Aussie street fight," and it was quite funny because it was just a pretty standard hardcore match. And at one point, a chair went flying into the crowd because somebody, I think it was one of the Nasty Boys, it might have been Knobs, hit someone and it slid out of his hands, went to the crowd, and everyone, and you heard a big "oh" from the crowd. And they got the biggest pop of the night so far, despite the Hogan look-alike. There was an old dude there who looked like Hogan, wearing black, and every time he got up and walked around, everyone would start screaming and taking photos of him because they thought it was Hogan. I think some of them were, and some of them just thought it was cool that he looked so much like Hogan. But you could tell it wasn't him, obviously. But at the end of the Nasty Boys versus Vampire Warrior and Black Pearl, I was a bit concerned for Knobs' health, but then I reminded myself it was Knobs and I didn't care about him because he went as red as a fucking tomato and was breathing out of his mouth. His tongue was poking out. He was just, and it looked like he was just going to die. He tried climbing to the second rope because Sags did. He climbed to the second rope, put his hands up, and was happy. Knobs tried the same thing on the other turnbuckle. Couldn't get to the second rope, unfortunately. It was sad, funny, and it was many things at the same time. But I suspect he's actually in the hospital now, in the emergency room, getting heart surgery at this very moment. Open heart surgery, obviously. The fourth match was Bruce Beefcake and Jimmy Hart versus Heidenreich. Oh, and Jimmy Hart had this jacket on that had the WWE symbol on it, but they tried covering it up by putting extra lines on it, so it just looked like a bunch of things. But it obviously was a WWE shirt they were trying to cover up. That was a WWE jacket, that is. So yeah, Bruce Beefcake versus Heidenreich. This match was horrific. Bruce Beefcake looked to be in fairly good shape, roids, but had these funny-looking pants which made it look like he put a hand grenade in his pocket. And they were like fishnets on the side. It was rather disgusting and something I really didn't need to see. Heidenreich, he was just Heidenreich. This match was terrible and finished with a sleeper hold. And T-shirts, all of them were Hogan shirts, and all of them were $50. Now, Hogan was the star of the show, but Ric Flair got a lot of support as well. Like, he was easily on par with Hogan in terms of how much the fans wanted to see him. Anyway, fifth match after intermission was Lacey Von Erich versus Carl Marie Turner versus Kiara Dillon versus Stephanie Pietz. It was a bikini challenge, and there's nothing to say about it except for Lacey Von Erich was extremely over. Next match, Sean Morley, formerly known as Val Venis, versus Ken Anderson, formerly known as Mr. Kennedy. Kennedy cut a really good promo saying how Mr. Kennedy was dead and it's Mr. Anderson now. Match itself was extremely boring as it was just rest hold, rest hold, rest hold. Like, you think an episode of Raw or something is bad when they put in rest holds. This was literally just 10, 12 minutes of rest holds, like, with, 2 minutes of anything that wasn't a rest hold. It was terrible, and they both looked really badly out of shape compared to what, I'm used to seeing. I was just like, wow, they've let themselves go. But, I didn't care too much about that. But, they wouldn't get back into the WWE looking like that. I don't know if they want to, though. Seventh match, and it was a tag team match. Orlando Jordan and Edward Smith Fatu. And Orlando Jordan was doing the Black Flair gimmick. Edward Smith Fatu, formerly known as Umaga, they called him like Uso Fatu. I'm just reading this off the screen. Versus Junior Fatu, which is Rikishi, and Brian Christopher, which was kind of a Too Cool reunion thing. I'm playing with my hair too much. It's just in knots because I got it wet. This match was, I don't know, it was fun. Orlando Jordan looked to be in really good shape and it was a really good work. Umaga looked good, had a bit strange music. The match, Brian Christopher looked out of shape, but he's gotten a bit older, and so you kind of expect that. And Rikishi, he still looked pretty good. But the match itself was probably one of the better matches. It's just the crowd wasn't too into it until there was a stink face done. Obviously, I saw the stink face live, yay! And then they wanted to do the Too Cool dance, but they didn't have Scotty 2 Hotty, so they got the ref to do it. I should also add now that the ref had his hair cut earlier in the night by Brutus Beefcake. So yeah, and then the main event, Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan. They'd been hyping this match up throughout the night, and there was even a promo on the big screen by Flair. That was amazing. This was like one of the best promos I've seen in wrestling. It was just really, really good, and I wish I'd recorded it. Maybe it was because I was there live, but it was a pre-tape thing. But it really got me really fucking pumped for the match. I wanted to see it. It was kind of a face promo from Flair when I was just expecting him to be a heel, but he was pumped, and it made me pumped for the match, and it was great. Then the match happened. The crowd went nuts when Flair came out, and he was a heel. The crowd went nuts when Hogan came out, and he was a face. There was fireworks. And then the match started, and I was kind of a bit scared. Hogan looked out of shape. His gut looked a bit bigger. Flair, same thing. He had a bigger gut. His legs looked fairly thin, and so did his arms. Even though he'd said in interviews that he's in the best shape of his life, he didn't look it. And they both got gassed very early on. There was a shoulder barge early in the match where I held my breath because it was a shoulder barge from Flair to Hogan, and Hogan was just supposed to block it, and like he does. But he went to block it and fucking stumbled back, and he would have fallen flat on his ass if it wasn't for the ropes. Then later on, he knocked Flair out of the ring, went to chase Flair out of the ring. His knee brace got caught in the ropes. He was outside trying to put it back on. The ref wasn't counting out because obviously it wasn't planned, and then he just ripped his knee brace off and threw it to the crowd, and that made me a bit worried. They both did the blade. It was a pretty standard match, but Hogan took 1.5 bumps. Like, he took one proper bump, and he held the ropes for another bump while going down, so it was quite sad. Flair himself, but the crowd was hot for all of this kind of stuff, so it was really a testament to how big of names they are. Flair took a bump off the top rope, and this is his return match, you got to remember. And he took a bit more bumps, but he still took it fairly easy. He took a bump off the top rope, went to the top rope, got thrown down. And crowd pop went nuts for that, but Flair didn't look like he wanted to go down when he got up there. He was kind of hesitant about it. Hogan went for a back suplex. It looked terrible. He kind of just fell backwards with him. It looked more like a side Russian leg sweep. They both did massive blade jobs, bleeding everywhere. Hogan went for a big boot, missed his face by a foot. Didn't go for the leg drop. Obviously, he couldn't do it. But instead, there was Lacey Von Erich interfering. Ric Flair had used brass knucks on him. Hogan hulked out, took the brass knucks, while Lacey Von Erich... It was a bit of a clusterfuck at the end, but you kind of expected it. Hogan won by using the brass knucks on Flair. It was a terrible match, but the crowd was into it, and I enjoyed it, partially because of its terribleness, but Hogan also went as Reza Tomato, and I was really worried for his health. Same thing with Flair. They got gassed very quickly, and they're doing this for like 4 more nights, so I am worried. But yeah, overall, it was an amazing experience.